I've got to bring things back down and talk a little bit more about the economic issues. So what I'd like to do is just give you a project briefing about how we got to this stage, some of the things we've done, what we've learned, and how it can be a model and something to build for the other cities to build off going forward. It was really important for us to look at, for me and for all of us here, to understand the framework that we're operating in. And when you look at the numbers, this time it really does look different from an economic perspective. And when we met with a lot of cities, the communities, that message hadn't hit them yet. There was just a sense of what I would call a surplus of optimism going forward about things are going to turn around. We're America. We're going to keep going forward. Not a problem. But when you begin to look at things, we do have some real issues here. So I don't know if it's a depression, but it took us a heck of a long time to figure out we were in a recession. And you begin to think about what are the solutions going forward, and what if we are heading toward a depression. So again, I bring you down, but we'll go back up. It's not only in the United States that we have problems. There's major problems. Britain's recession for 88 years. Argentina's in default. Iceland's in default. Greece is going bankrupt. Spain, big issues there. Italy. There's 36 states in this country with budgets seriously in the red. California, Georgia, New York. People thought we were going to get a big turnaround in retail sales for the Christmas season. It didn't happen. And so what people are saying is that second quarter is going to be some serious fallout. So, and I do it not to be an internal pessimist, but it's a message that I think that people have to understand when you're talking to communities and cities and citizens, that we really are potentially facing something much different than we have before. And it's not something we've seen in our lifetimes. So, just a couple more charts. I'm going to go through these real quick. But this is a brand new chart that came out last week from Moody's and Standard & Poor's, looking at the housing and the retail. The red line is commercial real estate. And you've heard the saying, retail follows rooftops. And it's certainly true here as well. You begin to see a small recovery in housing. But remember, housing has been injected with steroids of $8,000 home buyer tax credits. We've got cash for clunkers programs. We've got the stimulus packages. People said this economy should be on a rocket ship going straight up with all those incentives, and it's not happening yet. And so Mike talked about the introduction or the greater influence of the internet economy. I was talking to a grandmother right before Christmas, and I said, how's your Christmas shopping coming? And she said, yeah, I've got it all done. I did it 3 months ago. I said, how did you do that? She goes, I did it all online for all my grandkids. I said, is that the first time you've ever done it? She goes, oh, yeah, this is great. This is so easy. So I said, you're not going to malls anymore. That's hurting the malls. She goes, I never thought about that. But what a change that you can do so much online now, get everything delivered to your door, so why have to go out to a place that needs a plumber? So that's one of the big problems that we're having in Atlanta and in the Southeast. I'll get to more of that. Rail traffic dropped significantly from 2006 is the blue line, 2007 green line. 2008 it dropped off a cliff in the fall, and now in 2009 it's gone even lower. Those are brand new numbers showing rail traffic of goods being delivered. So the demand just isn't there, and the goods aren't being distributed. So how we got here. One of the things we had to look at was what happened during the financial crisis. How did we get in this position? And it's still taking people a lot to figure out. There's a great book called Too Big to Fail by Andrew Sorkin, and he goes through this, and it goes through the whole financial process. It's a big, fat book. In fact, it's too big to read almost. But it gives a great narrative of the story behind what was going on at Wall Street and how disengaged so many political leaders and the business community were to this problem, and when it hit, the drastic measures that had to be taken. And it's really, I think it's the only example that we can look at to say, going forward, what's going to happen? What could happen? So it's cheap money and rapid urbanization just led to a massive expansion in the housing market. And so the subprime mortgage, I think we know the issues with that, created the widespread financial stress. The banks repackaged everything. Later on, mid-March to September, Bear Stearns began to take over. So now you've got an investment banking institution that's in deep trouble. You've got many other countries hit with financial crises as well. Ireland was impacted severely. Iceland was another one. Lehman Brothers heads toward bankruptcy. This is in mid-March to September 2008. This is before we even recognized there was much of a problem, at least in Main Street and in the communities. So from mid-September to late October, a whole bunch of crazy things happened. Around September 15th, Lehman Brothers, big investment banking organization, the banking system, people lost confidence in the banking system, and the markets cratered. And you had a situation where major firms like AIG, General Electric, Bank of America, Citigroup, Wachovia, Morgan Stanley, a whole bunch of others were coming to the government saying, we need $50 billion in 3 days or we're going to tank. And the markets are going to crater. And it's just Paulson called it great, that we were on the verge of a Great Depression 2.0, economic 9/11. And that's pretty serious coming from the Secretary of the Treasury saying words like that. So again, most of us we didn't know what was going on. We saw the stock market dropping, but these things weren't out and open in the press, and people didn't really understand what was happening. Congress didn't know what was going on. So late March, the markets continued to decline. We hit a generational low in the stock market in March, where people really didn't know what was going to happen next. Severe stress. So through last year, it continued to deepen. Unemployment got worse and worse. So Wall Street has recovered. 60% recovery in the stock market, in the Dow, for example. Main Street hasn't. So all those financial bailouts that have hit Wall Street and Washington, they haven't trickled down. That's going to take a long time for that to happen, if it does. Mike showed this graph before. I think it's one of the most amazing charts I've ever seen. We first saw this, we didn't believe it. And I thought to myself, we've gone from thinking in terms of thousands and millions to seeing numbers reported in billions, and the bottom line, trillions. So suddenly, 11.4 trillion doesn't seem to resonate like it did a few years ago, a year ago. And then we put 11.4 and I think it's 10, 11 zeros on there. So just to give you what a number like that looks like, just to give you a sense of that. So again, as Mike said, it's a plan needed to address the physical assets. And yes, these numbers are real. We sat down with the Federal Reserve, and one of our colleagues held that up in front of him and said, is this real? And he says, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, it's probably worse than that. I said, oh my gosh. And so we were in dismay. So getting your head around what we're talking about in scale takes some time. And when we were talking to people who still are, it takes an awful lot of time. And we found this chart to be pretty valuable to show to people this is where the funding could come from. And this is the size of the problem that we're talking about. So when you start talking about $5 billion, if you look at some of these numbers, the TARP was $700 billion in stimulus money. People complain about that. There's $780 in here. Where am I? $780 for the stimulus. Those are just barely 13% of the total. Those are the ones you hear about all the time. But what about the other 87%? Well, all that money's, again, sitting there in those programs, and it's been allocated. But again, nothing to address the physical assets. So let's bring it down to earth a little bit. What's happening on foreclosures? And we see in neighborhoods, we can begin to look at zip codes. We can get down to that level, counties. What's happening? Well, Florida's being crushed. Nevada's being crushed. Georgia's hurting, Louisiana, Midwest. When you just look at foreclosures, national average about 13.2, and the states in red and orange are well above that. That's probably not going to get better in the near term. In fact, people are saying spring 2010, real estate goes in cycles. So we've been in the fall of 2009, winter 2009, things have been, people don't have their homes on the market. You can't put your home on the market when there's 3 feet of snow in the yard for the most part. But come spring, all the for sale signs go up, and people are thinking, gosh, up and down the streets. There are going to be for sale signs all over the place because people haven't been able to change jobs if they had to, or they couldn't leave their communities because they couldn't sell their homes. So those issues are hitting home, and they're going to be hitting home even harder, we think, going forward. So I'm just going to go through these fairly quick, but there's a couple of good points that just to, again, put the scope of the problem on the ground for everybody. So the foreclosures continue to rise, the inventories continue to rise, and we're looking at a year increase of 81% from where we were just about a year ago. Top line is subprime. So everybody kind of has a pretty good handle on what happened at subprime. These are people that couldn't afford homes at all, got loans, and now they're foreclosing. So that makes sense. We can understand that. But let's look at people that could afford homes. And this is a problem. So you've got foreclosure inventories for people that got jumbo prime mortgages. So good loans. And the example in the box, in the top box, says these were the ultimate walk-away loan. So a household could qualify for a $650,000 home with 5% or less down during the peak. That's crazy. That's crazy. So these people could afford homes, but not $650,000 homes. And so now what's happening is that people that normally could afford things are walking away. And so that's a huge jump in the foreclosure market, and that's really driving things going forward. Again, on high-end homes. This isn't subprime. These are high-end properties. And so you've got it's a depreciating asset. So you've got people walking away from something that once was deemed to have a tremendous amount of value. This is just an example that's showing the deterioration in the loans. And so it's gone from, so the first number on the left is 0.02%, January 31st, 2009. And you go forward to November 30th, 2009. And these are loans outstanding. Those are days in arrears that people haven't been able to make payments. So the blue bar is greater than 680 days. So just a tremendous increase. Yes?
And this pretty much mirrors interruption in employment and loss of employment. So those bars are continuing to grow and will because we're still going to feel the long-term effect of this. Is that where you got that information?
This is ties in with that. Yes, exactly. I was hoping you were going to have some good news. All right. So here's a chart that looks at office vacancy rates versus the unemployment rates. So official unemployment, 10.2, but if you count everybody in, 7.3 is the number now, and may go higher. So good correlation there between, again, office vacancies and the unemployment numbers. Private construction spending, again, the commercial is in red, and it just drops off a cliff, as you've seen. So a few things we've learned past few months. Congress has been so focused on health care, and I think there's a perception that, boy, we did the stimulus packages, that should take care of the economy. Well, that hasn't happened. And one of the reasons is it takes an awful long time for federal programs to get money out the door. And here in Georgia, one of the organizations that received a big chunk of funding, well, their budgets increased by eight times, but their staff still remained the same. So now you're asking the same amount of staff to handle a budget that just blows away anything they've ever had. They don't know how to do it, and so it's taken a long time for funding to get processed. Also, one of the issues is the states are trying to fill in their own budget gaps with stimulus money. So funding isn't going to the projects that we're stimulating, put it that way. The Federal Reserve, they lowered interest rates to about as low as they can. So they don't really have much gunpowder in their guns anymore to do much. Congress is trying to cut their powers. And so they are in a position that they're afraid to act because they don't want to go too far out on a limb. And so now they're preparing for 700 bank failures in 2010. Could that happen? Well, I don't know. There were 150 bank failures in 2009. But so we look for what we call orthogonal data points, and I mentioned this to some folks yesterday. the people that are in charge of going into the banks the day that the foreclosure starts is the FDIC. And the FDIC has increased their budgets by tens of billions, and they're hiring lots and lots of people to get ready for this. So is it going to happen? Well, a lot of people seem to think that that may be the case. And when you see the budgets increasing like that and the hiring start to occur, to me it sends a pretty big signal. Yes, I do. Wall Street Journal has a great site that'll take you through time. If you type in like Google bank failures, Wall Street Journal, it's got a great chart that just shows these balloons popping for all the states throughout the country, and that gives a good illustration of where those are. So the big banks, they've been repaying their bailout funds that they took, but they're under a lot of scrutiny from Congress. I mean, you see it every day in the press, whether it's for executive compensation, whether it's bonuses. So they're not moving anywhere. They're afraid to do anything. So big banks aren't lending. Number one, they don't want to increase their exposure or their risk. And right now, they can make a whole lot of money borrowing it close to zero from the Fed and turning it around and lending it to us at 3% or more. So they don't have much incentive to really get things done. That's why they're making a lot of money right now. Who was it? Well, Goldman's been making an awful lot of money. So the banks are making money by doing that, by borrowing at very, very cheap rates. So they don't have to do much right now.
They're doing it, the way they're doing it, they're borrowing from the Fed at 0% and investing in government treasuries at 3 or 4%. So they're basically just staying, the money's all staying within the government, and they're making it spread on the government. It's not going into anybody loaning it to you or me. It's a transaction that's all within the government, inventing money, so to speak.
So, but, it used to be making 3% wasn't too impressive. Now it's, hey, people seem to, they're clamoring to get 3%.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
Do you, notwithstanding like how mortgages and employment are so interrelated, do you think that healthcare passing will end up being the positive economic benefit that supporters say it will, or is it really totally unrelated?
Well, that's a hot potato, and from what I've heard and from what I understand, a lot of the things that are being proposed for healthcare aren't going to occur for 3 or 4 years, or maybe longer. And so, short term, I don't see how that's going to have a whole lot of impact, because we haven't seen the stimulus have a whole lot of impact on the ground, because it does take an awful long time for things to get through. So I don't know, nor do I even know if it's going to pass or what the prospects are for it passing, considering the situations in Congress. So locally, we had 31 bank failures here in the state. There's 57 more that show signs of trouble. 12-year supply of office space. 12 years. That's a. I mean, so if you're an office builder, good gosh, what do you do? Well, the minute somebody comes in and buys a new one, or puts up new office supply, everybody's going to flock to that. Well, who wants stuff that's old? When I can get great deals on brand new things at prime locations. So from 1995 to 2005, about 10 years, Atlanta led the nation every year in single-family housing starts. And that's pretty crazy. And so now those numbers have dropped 90%, 95% for multifamily housing. So Wells Fargo's done a lot of work on this, and they're based out of Charlotte, but they do work all around the country, and they have done a whole bunch of reports on Atlanta just to indicate the magnitude of the problem. Why was it so bad here? Well, we had very lax banking regulations. We had high mortgage fraud. We had a lot of people that were, is a big banking hub here. We have no physical boundaries. We don't have the lakes, the mountains, anything to keep us from growing in any direction, and we did. And so that got us in the situation that we're in. Overdevelopment, bad lending practices, you name it. So what we're seeing here is that the lot prices now, today, are basically back to 2002 levels. So it's almost like rolling back the clock a decade. And as Matt and Joe will talk about this afternoon, we've seen that in many cities as well. It's like a time warp, going back 10 years in terms of the number of transactions in commercial real estate that we're seeing, in addition to the dollar volumes being exchanged. So it's a real rollback and a real change. from where we were. 10-month supply of houses is where we are now. 6 to 7 months is normal in the system. Still an awful lot. We've got in Atlanta, we've got the perimeter 285, and inside the perimeter, which is where you are now, inside the perimeter, it's about a 10-mile radius from here. Tremendous amount of real estate that's out there that is available for sale, but it's not moving. And it's not moving because developers can't get loans. It's not moving because people can't sell their places. And it's not moving because there's no demand. So the banks are stuck. The developers are stuck. So there's no liquidity in the system. What's happening is we're losing jobs big time. We had immigration problems here in the city because in the metro area because people didn't know how to handle big influxes of construction workers and landscaping teams and restaurant people and all that. We have the opposite now. We've got a big outflow of jobs, and people are going back, closing up shop, leaving, and going back to wherever they came from. And that is not something that the city planners and everybody here was ready for. So when those folks are now leaving, it's reduced the occupancy in some of the housing, 20% in many cases, down to levels of 20% occupancy. You're seeing businesses closed up that serviced those communities. And now you've got an massive outflow of people in a region that was just so used to growth. So what are we doing? At Georgia Tech, we got a new slogan. So anybody is welcome to adopt that as well. So that was one of I don't know. That was the best thing we could come up with as a solution to this. Our students liked it. So anyway, Mike came to us and said, Messner Foundation or Messner Film, and said, "Hey, given $5 billion, pull a number out of the air, what could be done, and what kind of impact would that have?" And so we had to think about it not in terms of parks necessarily, but reducing the supply. Reduce the supply in order to increase the demand. Roll the clock back 10 years in terms of commercial, retail, housing supply, and what would the impact be? How much could we buy with that kind of money? And when you start thinking in those terms, as the cities have seen, it just blows the doors off your traditional thinking. It just absolutely changes how you've thought about projects, parks, whatever it may be in the past. So it's a real game changer when you start thinking about that. What size, how many non-performing assets could we actually purchase within? So we look at it within the perimeter around Atlanta, and we looked at a 20-mile radius outside because we couldn't spend all that money inside the perimeter. So we had to go much further out. We've got some other problems. We're park deficient in a big way. We've got tri-state water war that many have heard about. We haven't addressed that. We've been letting that linger for about 20 years. We've got to get that resolved in about 2.5 years, or else the judge is going to resolve it for us. We've got a 10-plus year supply of retail. So if you've got 50,000 square feet, take a big PetSmart, for example, or Circuit City, or whatever it may be. Circuit Cities are gone, but what are you going to do with 50,000 square feet? I don't know anybody that was willing to take up that kind of retail space now and thinks they can sell an awful lot because you've got so much competition from online. You can go to Walmart, you can go to Kroger's, you can go to Target. How many places can you go and all buy the same things? And then get online and buy anything you want. So I don't know what people can do with those big boxes going forward. I've got a Kindle. If you've got a Kindle, you can now get books dumped to your screens all the time. Pretty soon they're going to have those on the iPhones and the Palms as well, from what I understand. So I don't have to shop anymore. So it's a big change. We talked about the housing a little bit. So just to put the numbers in perspective, in terms of park space for acres of land area, we're park deficient here. We've got a lot of trees, but we don't have much park space. And again, we're pretty low on the acres of parkland per 1,000 residents. Most of the parks we have, you see down the bottom, are pretty small. We've got a fair amount of nature preserves, less than 15 acres. In this metro area, you've got to be around 5 acres for a city to want to invest in the maintenance and the care of a park. So parks that are smaller than that really become a headache for the cities and the municipalities here. As people may have mentioned yesterday, Atlanta's charter doesn't allow it to, they can take money in for, and tax revenues in for water, garbage, and security. We'll stand up all day long, and our leaders will stand up all day long and say, boy, we love parks. But they don't have a revenue stream to take care of them. So when somebody says, hey, I want to donate 100 acres of parkland to you, they don't have any way to take care of it. And Deb can attest to that, being head of the Piedmont Park Conservancy at one time. So we're just looking at the city. We had to figure out what could be a way to address these issues in an area where the city isn't equipped or chartered to do such a thing. So you really had to begin to think much differently about private partners and so forth, and how you make parks viable in an area where the city doesn't have the funding stream to support it. Again, just a little, that's the metro area, and you can see we can just grow in any direction, and we did. Unemployment, you see some of the states that are leaders, Michigan, Nevada, California, Ohio, Kentucky, Florida, D.C., Mississippi, Missouri follow behind. Those are back September numbers, and I think they've probably changed since then. We lead the nation in the sheer volume of bank failures, and that's the real driver for us. For other cities, it's going to be something different. It could be bank failures, or it may be housing issues. It may be industrial property blight. But that was a real driver for us. Illinois was also clobbered, California, Florida, Arizona. So we had to figure out a way, if we're going to try to tackle this problem, what's a feasible way to do it from a project delivery standpoint? How are you going to make it happen? So we talked to a lot of people. We talked to agencies. We talked to financial teams, investment bankers, community leaders, parks people that were experts in this. We're not really parks people here at Tech, but we could, don't even come close to it, but what we just looked at from a supply and demand issue. How can you take a big chunk of real estate off the market, and what are the best uses of it going forward? What we wanted to do is really leverage existing projects as much as we could. We used the CoStar database. We just looked at commercial. We didn't focus on residential because it's so scattered. We could do so much here in Atlanta with commercial that residential was just a blip. And trying to go into neighborhoods and extract individual parcels was very difficult for us. So we just kind of pulled out a big crayon. So we know we've got a large commercial corridor here. What can we do along those areas? So this is an important chart. I think most of you have seen it. It breaks down the idea. Yes?
I'm sorry, could you go back to that previous slide? I'm not sure I understood what you meant by leveraging existing projects.
Sure. Okay. What we wanted to do was look at existing projects that were on the books for the city of Atlanta. And I'll get to some examples of those. The Beltline is one. Green space programs that were put together by the Atlanta Regional Commission. So we wanted to look at areas that might tie in with that. We've got a creek system. We were subject to here in September to a 500-year flood. 500-year flood. And so now you begin to think about what could be done along those areas that flooded in terms of taking land and tying it in with existing projects going forward, transportation and redevelopment efforts, things like that. So we looked at taking 60% of the money of that conceptual play money and devoting that towards acquisition alone to reduce the supply. We listened to what the parks people were telling us. They said, you've got to have a lot of money in there for design, construction, master planning, demolition, tackling environmental issues, so we did that. 20% of the money goes to that, and another 20% goes to operation and maintenance, and this is the piece they really asked us to focus on. You can't just do the standard for taking care of parks. You've got to go way beyond what is being done to make sure you've got a good, viable park that people are going to want to visit. Security is obviously a big issue, so we said let's take 20% of the money and put it into that. So the objective here is let's take a 100-acre tract. And what if we took 40% and said we want to make that a park? Or it could be 60%, it could be 80%, whatever the number is. We want to take a big chunk of it and make parks out of it, okay? Make a park out of it. And what if we could take that remaining acreage and then hold it for 5 years and then begin to redevelop it when the market comes back? So what do you put there? Well, now you've got an established park. Could be a park in perpetuity if it's been donated to you. And now you've got, now the idea is that the land around that is going to increase in value because it's adjacent to a park, and it may connect with green space or mass transit or whatever it might be. So the funding from that, it could come in the form of, maybe it's 25 cents fee on a square foot common area maintenance fee that's going to be used from that commercial development to take care of the parks. So in order for the parks to be viable long term, you've got to have a funding revenue source to come in to take care of it. So everybody understands that, but it was really crucial for us to emphasize that. This isn't just parks, it's economic redevelopment. We've got to get people back to work. People don't care about parks if there's not jobs. We've got to get jobs going first. And so by reducing that demand, increasing the value in the property. So did that hypothesis work out, or did that theory work out? Yes, it did. We began to see that the parks projects, when they were promised for the Atlanta area in some areas, the property values skyrocketed. Properties that were worth $20,000, not even that, $20,000 an acre, went up to over $1 million an acre in some cases, just because of the promise of a park coming through. Now, we only looked at sales that were on the books, things that we could actually access in the databases. We couldn't, deals that were done by one broker calling another, say, hey, I got 100 acres, I'm going to dump it to you, what do you do? We couldn't, we don't have a way to access that. So everything we looked at was listed and on the books at the ongoing prices. So outside the perimeter, we found that there's roughly 22,000 acres of available. We built what people call PVC farms. These were developments, housing developments that were put in. They put in the circles and the curbs and the PVC. And now the builders, because they've gone underwater, have walked away. So you've got PVC farms out there, large tracts of land. You could say it's residential, but it's really not because there's nobody living there. And the builders still own it, developers still own it. So an awful lot of property outside some of these areas that's available that could be accessed. So we looked at inside the perimeter, big projects that would fundamentally change way of life inside the perimeter of Atlanta. We've got one here. This is what we call the Peachtree Creek Greenbelt. This goes along the floodplain, cuts through, connects with some of the Olmsted parks that were built, connects universities, the CDC, connects everybody with the mass transit to get them downtown. On the south side of I-20, we are very park deficient, so we look at some areas there. We've got Fort McPherson, which is a Army installation that's closing down. How could you leverage that? With great infrastructure there, but outside you've got some corridors that really need are ripe for redevelopment. There's a section out here called the Honor Farm. There's an old prison farm and some landfills, but there's roughly 500 acres out there that were purchased, kind of being held in land bank or conservation right now. What if we could connect those two areas with these billions of dollars? Now we were looking at a 500-acre park that connect with a infrastructure of a former military base, or a 1,000-acre park, excuse me, along that corridor. It connects with mass transit, connects some neighborhoods that really need development, that really need jobs, and that's how we began to think about, boy, what is this going to do? You talk about transforming an area. You think of something the size of Central Park, it's about 840 acres or so. Putting a Central Park down in an area of Atlanta that's depleted, boy, that's a game changer. One big project you've heard us talk about is called the Beltline, 22 miles of rail. They need a lot of money right now. So they need $660 million to launch more of these projects. They've got some underway and off the ground. So what would a cash injection like this was being proposed due to a project like the Beltline? Man, it would really significant changes. They're looking at, I have to look at the numbers and cheat here, over 25 years, 48,000 temporary jobs and 30,000 projected new jobs to come along. And that's a game changer. So somebody says, wow, you're going to spend this money. What's it going to do? And so I've pestered people and said, hey, you've got to be able to tell us, what do you think the perceived economic impact of a program like this would be for your city and your community? And that's the type of thing that we're looking for. It's not just a few jobs here and there. It's not just a couple green jobs. That's big, okay? So what we saw along the Beltline, again, properties went from roughly $20,000 an acre because of the promise of a park and the Beltline, the idea, up to over $1 million. And that's really changed the landscape in Atlanta. So I want to show you just a little trailer about this.
2010 is going to be a banner year for the Beltline. This is when the Beltline goes from an idea to a set of plans to reality.
I think it's going to be transformational. I think that it will probably be second in impact over the next decade, only to Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. That's why I'm here today expressing my support and letting everyone know that I'm committed to seeing the Beltline and all of the benefits that come with it through.
I really do believe that the Beltline becomes more than just a project. It's a way to bring our community together and to connect neighborhoods that may not necessarily be connected. This is going to be really a great opportunity for us as a city.
It makes sense that with the West End being the oldest neighborhood in the city, that they'd start the Beltline over here. I see a lot more people out using it, jogging, walking their dogs. It's really bringing the community together.
The Beltline was definitely a part of my decision to buy my house, and it's very close to what's going to be a great transportation area, and I'll be able to walk 2 blocks and be connected to the whole city, so it's invaluable.
What anchors communities is educational access, access to retail, and also access to public transportation and resources, and the Beltline is going to be an integral part of that.
While the Beltline consists of paths, trails, and green space, the Beltline is more. This is an opportunity to finally begin to make and shape our community. We are a Beltline community, and what this means is we're a prime location.
Our neighborhood is kind of transitioning, so it's really nice to see people who've been in the neighborhood for 40 years and people who've been here for a couple of months come together.
It's such a transformative project for not only my generation, but my children's generation, and really just the future of the city. I love the way it connects all different aspects of the city and really pulls together both the history and the future. The way I describe it is it checks all the boxes, everything from health to transit, to planning, to environment, to youth, to seniors. It really just checks all the boxes. There's nothing like it in the country.
Being able to walk out of your house onto the Beltline, catch a train, into a park, the Beltline can bring that, and it brings people together. And in a diverse city like Atlanta, and a diverse collection of neighborhoods, the Beltline can be that one unifying connection.
I think we don't want to assume that it's a no-brainer. There are folks that need to be brought along. There are folks that can become resources and assets for us as we advance the Beltline. So we need to take the attitude that the Beltline is a project that we believe is important, that can transform our city, and that we want everyone to kind of share in that vision. And so as we get people to share in that vision, it's incumbent upon us to kind of bring them along and educate them and get them involved in the various projects.
I certainly believe we're going to get it done. I'm excited about the project. I'm committed to it and look forward to partnering with citizens all over Atlanta to make the Beltline a reality.
Anyway, you can see from this chart what land-only 5-year historical average for around the Beltline was, and those numbers are inflated because the Beltline's been on the books for some time. And what's on the market today, about 1.2 million an acre. For again, those numbers were much lower before the project was even conceived. So we're looking to buy, with this type of money, acreage along the Beltline that's been planned, so that they can increase the amount of acreage there by 750 acres, double it. So along the Beltline, so we're looking at over 1,500 acres, 750 acres is what we're looking at along that Beltline.
One thing that's worth noting here is that when a park has been announced, land is a lot more expensive. When you buy land and people don't know it's going to be a park, then you're going to get it much cheaper. So remember that when you're out there thinking about acquiring property.
You want to operate under the radar. Yeah.
Don't play your hand before necessary.
Right. The Peachtree Creek Greenbelt is one that we looked at. We identified 1,500 acres for 36 miles of connected trail and watershed buffer protection. This linked the Beltline, 3 distressed malls, Emory CDC, mass transportation, and the graph on the bottom shows the drop in the vacancy rate versus the square foot on the deliveries, how much was being built. So you can see a big increase in the vacancy rate and what the decline was in the office space being built just along that segment of the trail. And this is what we've done for your cities as well with the projects you have identified. So we've got that data for you as well. North Lake Mall, just a typical mall. But if you look at acreage up around there, you could purchase roughly 100 acres. Asking price is $50 million, ballpark. But the surrounding land values around there have declined about 85%. And so what could be done with that? We talk about 100-acre size park, or maybe 80 acres of park, 20 acres of park. You know, that's up for others to decide. But boy, that's a game changer as well for a major shopping center. Yes?
I spoke to the owner of the North Lake Mall, and Simon's Group, and he was saying, you know, clearly it's an underperforming mall for them. They want to get rid of it. You know, you're saying $50 million, but if you have the right financial structure, you know, you can end up going into a land bank or something, get rid of it quicker, reposition its own portfolio. So a lot of developers want to reposition their portfolio and need the mechanism to help them reposition.
Is that the right location for a park? Boy, we think so. A lot of people seem to think so. And then all the properties aren't going to fall into that neat little, this is going to fit our model. But with this kind of money, we're not being, you've got some room for discretion. And when somebody comes to an organization with a big basket of properties, they're going to give you a bunch of junk too. So as long as it's not an NPL site, the environmental liabilities are typically manageable. You can do a lot with that. And whether it's green space that is land banked, whether it turns into soccer fields for an area, baseball fields, there's a lot of things that can be done. But one of something we learned is that the FDIC and their appraisers are going out now, and they're looking at retail land, you know, land with it's as we call encumbered by development. So it's got a non-performing strip mall, and what they're saying is the best use of that land going forward is to take it back to farmland. So if land that is with strip malls on it or shopping centers or what have you is being valued as farmland, what's the next best use above farmland? Obviously, it's not retail because you can't, what are you going to put there? So that was a real shocker to us to hear developed land being valued as farmland and appraised as farmland. So we looked at what were the impacts, and we've been bothering the cities again. Tell us what you think the impacts are going to be. Over 15 Piedmont parks, roughly inside the perimeter with that kind of money, and 50% of the land outside the perimeter for sale could be purchased and set aside as green space, roughly 13,000 acres. Or if you looked at, boy, let's expand this throughout the state, 6,500 acres of park within 20 miles of Atlanta, and 780 miles of green belt. That's huge. So begin to look at that. Okay, $5 billion for state of Georgia or Atlanta. What about $5 billion here and there and there? You start distributing that. It's $200 billion throughout the country. What kind of impact would that have? That's huge. So one of the aspects that we didn't really touch on today were the health aspects. The South is Atlanta region, the state of Georgia are in the upper quartile for heart disease and obesity. So parks really can make a big difference there. We're working with the CDC. Jimmy is here today from the CDC. We're looking to find ways to work with them and their teams to put together the engineering, the planning, the architecture, all the parks pieces, and combine it with the health work that's going on at the CDC. And I know, Rich, that's a big part of what you do as well. So that's something that's hot on our plate as well. So really, Atlanta would be transformed. We think many cities would be transformed. They're feasible. We can do this work. This is architecture, construction, demolition, security, and rebuilding, putting in businesses that will serve a green-oriented or a park-oriented or a redevelopment-oriented community. Well, having a nice office next to a park, great office space next to a park, that'd be, that's not out of the question. So we're not talking about things that are crazy. We've got a whole lot of ideas about what could be done with the park space. Community gardens. With the advent of electric cars coming, maybe you've got to have solar-powered charging park stations. So you park your car someplace outside, a few miles from where you work, get your car charged during the day and take Metro in or something. So a lot of different ideas that can be done with this. They're also scalable. So just some observations again. When people looked at the unemployment, even the rosiest projections, if we get unemployment to 9%, we're looking at this problem through 2020. Under the rosiest unemployment projections. We've had that big of a hit. So these things aren't going away anytime soon. So what a tremendous opportunity for organizations to acquire property and do something different at values that are 70, 80, 90% below, again, already marked up values, but 70, 89% below what they were before. What a chance to get donated properties to you just so the banks can get it off their books. What we've also learned is that the more people we talk to, the more this idea makes sense. And the more they believe it because they don't have other solutions out there to address what they see as this impending wave of issues. So we've asked economists, tax people, you name it, a lot of economic folks, and they just kind of shake their heads. We asked the bankers, so you guys have got your paper assets taken care of. What about the physical assets? We don't know. They don't have anything. And that's what's really troubling is that we're a bunch of scientists and engineers looking at this, and they don't have good answers. And this is the one that's really made sense, and it's resonated at the highest levels of the government that people we've talked to. Catherine and her team did a tremendous job of marketing this, and they're going to do the same with yours, getting this to the congressional folks, people in HUD, Department of Interior, and others, and getting it exposed. And thank you very much. Okay. Questions? And please feel free to ask my colleagues questions as well. They're opening it up to them as well. Mm-hmm.
I've got two.
Yes.
The first one is, since you started the acquisition, have you had any pushback from other organizations, I guess, that have competing redevelopment interests that wouldn't necessarily be a part? And then my second question is, do you already have a structure and a model for a land banking system? Does it have government involvement?
What a great segue. After questions, we'll take a break, and then Laura Hughes is going to address all those questions. But we don't have the money yet. So, but we don't have it. But will there be competing interests? Absolutely, yes. And but you know what? With the magnitude of the problems, the Atlanta City Council spokesperson we talked to, she says, this city's desperate. People want solutions, and so when they're desperate, they're much more agreeable or amenable to things that they may not have thought of before. And so I think that's what we're going to see going forward. Yes?
Kevin, maybe you can help us, maybe someone else in the room.
Mm-hmm.
We started to look at data of what the average amount of acres per 1,000 people in dense cities and not so dense. Do you have a standard in which, when I look at a goal, I want to have a standard to try to meet? Do you have a standard or green space or open space that you'd like to see and measure it against some population numbers?
Joe or Laura, I know the ARC is what, 20% green space allocation number we've heard, or?
Yeah, well, I can talk to it later. But
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
We can't set the standard because there's so many cities and municipalities and counties that to dictate the standard would cause huge problems. And so I think we have to go with the standards that municipalities within Atlanta have set is very high, but they're not competing. So if we can help with
Dave, do you have any information on that? Or?
One thought is that Georgia's former green space program, which set 20% as the goal, 20% of the geographic area of the counties that participated in that program. So that was something that's been used somewhat as a measure, and some of the counties that we're working with still have that in mind, and they're well below that. But yet it's something that was established legislatively that has been out there and used as a bar, if you will.
One of our colleagues who's a developer, former developer, said that they used to argue vehemently to try to get the dog walk on the 14th story of their condominium complex permitted as green space. And now he's one of the strongest advocates for this whole parks idea. It's just amazing. But they did get it allocated as green space. So a real big shift in the development community's thinking here in Atlanta. Joe, I'm sorry.
To comment on that question further,
really just one metric. When you look at Philadelphia, for example, which has an abundance of green space as far as acres per person, well, when you take a more neighborhood approach, you don't have access. And so if you only look at total acres, maybe you're not addressing Philadelphia's needs. Wilmington doesn't have program space. So Wilmington, how many acres do we have? How many little? Is that what really matters there? So let's not pick an arbitrary metric that we all talk about downside, which is kind of example what makes sense for each city.
Yeah, that's a good point. That was going to be a follow-up comment too. And one of the things that is really being focused on right now is the linkages. How do we link these different green spaces? And maybe focus areas are more important. Like we're looking at a lot of projects around, drinking water, source water protection, for example, which is a huge issue in this state. And then a lot of the historical resources that are being lost too is another focus area that the communities are willing to get behind and support. So it's not a matter of how many acres can we put in. What do we want our community to look like 10 years, 20 years, 50 years down the road, and what are those important resources that we need to protect right now? So, and how do we get people to them?
That's right. That's what makes this approach unique, is that it's from the ground up. It's community driven. If the communities don't want it, it's not going to happen. So there's got to be that community buy-in. For this is how we think what the best use is of the park going forward. We can't decide that. We can just say, here's the capital infusion. How could it be used? Step up with your best projects, and maybe those will be the ones that get the funding. So.
I think it's important to note this $5 billion, really the question was, what would happen to the economy and real estate of Atlanta, first and foremost, if that doesn't use. So will it address the banking problem? Will it address the excess real estate problem? And then secondly, okay, how can you use that also to make it problem? So it really is a case that let's try to get $5 billion and try to fix the real estate problem. And then the outcome was also going to be much more livable city.
Yep. I want to get Scott. I'm sorry. He's had his raised hand. Go ahead.
Going back to the park acreage question, first of all, Trust for Public Land is really, I think, the best resource to track that. They do a great job, and we really rely heavily on that in Denver. We try to get an average in our master plan of about 10 acres per thousand, and we're right about at that. But the problem is our lines are going in opposite direction between population and acreage per thousand. But as one of you mentioned, I think it's more about where those parks are located, whether they're walkable, whether they're accessible. A lot of cities have very high acreage per thousand, but they're in big parks on the edges of the cities and so on. But what we have found, not to focus too much on, whether you're at 10 acres or 6 acres or 20 acres, it is a number that your mayor and your city council and political leaders get. It's an easy number to get. And they're always about competition, right? How do we compare to Pittsburgh or Miami or Cleveland? And it's something that is easy to float out there and to strive for. It's not quite so easy to track and explain how walkable your city is maybe or things along those lines. So it's a useful number, but not something you want to spend all your time for.
Okay. Thank you. Deb?
Yeah, what he said.
Okay.
I think it's really important, and I also wanted to mention that when we started trying to quantify, because Atlanta was so low on the scale in terms of, we used the statistics from Trust for Public Land, and we just started out saying, we want to hit the average. So that was part of the work, and then began to say, okay, but how many ball fields do we need, and how many rec centers do we need, et cetera. And then I want to come back to that point because I think it's really crucial when it was allowed that park space could be the dog run could be counted as park space. Balconies in condominiums could be counted as park space. That began to that's what I think we have to avoid. We have to clearly identify what truly is park and green space.
The answer was the answer I needed to hear, because I face local politicians who say, well, what do you mean you have to give me some comparative data in order for them to see, because they're very parochial thinkers.
Yes.
Just on
Oh, sir, yes. Go.
that one, TPL does, we have a report on our website at the Center for City Park Excellence. It's on TPL.org. You get the center, and they have an annual report, 2009 City Park Facts Report, which compares the 75 largest cities in the country on all sorts of measures, parks per acre, acres per its total city area, and so on. And even how much money each park district spends on the vouchers to other cities. So you can really compare, and that's the kind of data that Scott's referring to. It's helpful when you go to your city council to talk about where your city is relative to the cities you want to be like.
Those were the figures that you saw, the TPL figures that we used. They were very helpful in getting us to a level that we could understand what was going on. Yes?